you should be good to go, Heather.
Awesome. Okay, we'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. I'll go through roll call of planning commission members and then county commissioners. Howard Tritz. I see him on Zoom. Joey Edwards.
Here.
And then I know Stu Stevens couldn't make it today. Dave Clark Barrel. And then Jason Rufo.
Here.
Great. Heather Lind here. Roll call commissioners, Commissioner Fiedler.
Here.
Commissioner Mudge.
Here.
And Commissioner Edwards.
Here.
Great, thank you. Any changes or additions to the agenda?
Nope.
Yep. We have minutes to approve from August 26th and then again from September 9th. Everybody have a chance to take a look at those? Motions to approve?
Can we vote at one time?
Sure.
Edwards moves to approve the previous minutes.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And then update, thank you, Howard. Updates from staff.
Thank you so much. We have several applications coming your way. We have, not quite set, the Box Creek gravel mine, CUP, we haven't set that hearing date. But the application is in and we have sent it out, to the review agencies so that we can get early comments in. Once we get a better idea of what the degree of outstanding issues are, we're gonna go ahead and set that hearing date. Melissa will be the lead planner on, Box Creek Mining. And we're still kind of waiting to hear, we've got some, concerns from CDOT and improvements, that potentially would need to be made to the highway. Also, looking at County Road 10 and the bypass road are just some of the different areas that we're looking at in reviewing that file. We will be getting in November 12th, you'll be hearing a unusual request on a Continental Divide CUP application from Lee Reimel. He has an existing CUP and he wants to do a couple changes to it that are a little less restrictive than the entitlement that he was given. So stay tuned for that. Then we have, we just got in Timber Ranch's preliminary major subdivision PUD application. So it is in completeness review right now, and so we'll be probably setting that before the end of the year. And we are getting ready to, we've been engaging with community builders on our preparatory planning piece of kind of values and visioning as a community-wide, very inclusive process that will then lead into the comp plan update. And so, once we get a little further along in the process, we're looking at a community kickoff, I believe in November. We're thinking that our timeline will run until about the August of next year to complete the comp plan update. And at the front end of the work, we have carved out several learning opportunities. We're really gonna dive into kind of a comp plan 101. Some members of both the city and the county's planning commission are new and some of you are seasoned and have been through the comp plan process, but we really wanna make sure, understanding this is a statutory obligation of both the city and the county's planning commission, where we really wanna kind of front end that, you know, why we're doing this and what it means and what's the purpose of the comp plan. So we'll have some educational opportunities in the front end to just kind of kick the work off. And we are looking to have a very big public event to start the process. So we'll keep you advised as we continue to go through the work. On the project management team, Heather and Joey are participating on that, and on the city side, we have a couple members of the planning commission as well. So keeping in mind, this is a city and county process, and then we've engaged with community builders to be our more integrated partner in this work, as we've been working with them since March of last year when we did the Building Better Places workshop. And then we applied to them for technical assistance, and we were chosen And that's how we ended up going into engaging with them through this process. But the benefits are immense, both that they come in as more of an integrated partner in this, as well as a fiscal partner. So the ask of us financially is substantially less than what it would have been. So the ask of the county was $40,000 versus $200,000. So really exciting to have their involvement, and we're just doing the groundwork right now so that we can make sure that this is a really successful process. So and I know we have a couple other land use applications coming in. Oh, we have an ADU CUP that Melissa will be presenting to you in Panarch. Is there anyone else on the planning department have any other updates that you can think of?
We're working with the outfitters and guides.
Very good.
Where I think we have 3 out of the 4 outfitter and guides, their applications are in progress. So we've been working with them to get a complete application, to set a hearing for 3 of the 4. And, let's see, we have a site plan review that will be coming in the next month or so, for a solar system. And gosh, I think that might be it. I think that's it.
Mayor, I could say that the outfitters have, it's really challenging to implement these regulations.
Yeah.
So the big, and I think every week since I've been in here, it's been talking about the roads, public versus private. What do we do with all of the private access that's been used over time that now they need to demonstrate permission for? And the complexity of that, it's pretty complex. So, as well as just how they functioned and making sure they're good agreements. So, it's taking a while.
Absolutely, yeah, I think that's a really great point, the administration, there's always growing pains with new regulations. But the good news is that we're getting good participation from the outfitters. And then we're also gonna weigh in with Aaron Smith on a couple of the road questions that we have, so that we can make sure that we've fully vetted this before we bring it forward, so. I think those are our updates.
Oh, and we have 1 standard license left for short-term rentals.
Great, any questions? Alright, we'll move on down to new business, which is your drafted sign code amendment discussion.
Thank you so much. So tonight what we wanted to do is just have an open dialogue about posing some questions to the planning commission and the board about making sure that we're going to adequately address the outstanding concerns and kind of the reason that got us here. Well, what were we trying to solve by amending the sign code, and making sure that the things that staff has identified resonate with both planning commission and the board. So we don't actually have the draft fully prepared yet, but we wanted to do these kind of discussions on general modifications that we've identified that we think are a concern, and make sure that there aren't any missing pieces, or that we don't need to fine tune it just a little bit. So the things that we've first looked at were making sure our sign code aligns. Our design standards require dark sky compliance, but our sign code does not. And so we thought that that was one easy to identify missing piece of the sign code, and just keeping dark sky compliance consistent through our code. So I think we could probably, I will tell you that in working with Taco Bell, sign companies sometimes we discovered have I just assumed that they would have a dark sky compliance product. And what we are realizing is that we may have to provide a little bit of guidance on that, because knowing that some of these sign companies are national, certainly for anything in the formula business, we thought it'd be kind of easy. So it was kind of surprising that a formula business was having a little bit of a hard time with dark sky compliance. But we were able to get things like dimmers on their menu boards, at a certain time and things like that. So we've been able to come up with, I think, at least some standards that we might be able to apply in other areas. Maintenance standards, so I was gonna share, I sent an email over, but I just wanted to and maybe this is a good time to kind of share with you just a few quick snapshots that we took as we were on the south side of town. So this is a very short tour of just some southern signs, and so we've got Sugarloaf, Presbyterian as off-site signage, directional signage. There might be in a little bit of need of repair. We have this business that's now open, which is the Saddle Rock. This is the old Saddle Rock sign, south of town. We have the roadway in, and surprise, this is really not meant to be a design. It's just a little cracked and in disrepair a little bit. And then we really have partners that have really done it well. You know, we've got these nice monument signs at CMC, Lake County's own kind of directional sign. I wanted to do this is kind of a good indication, as you can see a roof line here. This is a taller sign, but you know, it's more of a directory kind of sign, where it's trying to provide a little bit more information or more than one office within a area. You know, this is a directional sign over here as well, directory sign. Forest Service. This is a new sign in the last couple of years, First Presbyterian Church, and this is also a new sign, Westwoods. So we've got some that, you know, these monument signs, I think are a good example of something that we're gonna talk about coming up and maybe in the gateway. This is more of, you know, more of a higher sign. We talked about internally about the sign that we're having them remove at Pizza Hut. And kind of the height of that's probably around a 25-foot sign. And this is getting, you know, probably in excess of 25 feet for a sign like this, just to kind of give some good visual of kind of, you know, what we're looking at when we start talking about height, because that's gonna be of concern. And then of course, so maintenance. We don't really have anything that speaks to maintenance. You know, when signs are starting to need a new paint job, or the business isn't even open yet anymore, and we've got these like littering the gateway, and again, another gateway sign. So just some good kind of examples there. Oops. Okay. So incorporating some maintenance standards into our code, I think that was a concern that was brought up by this group. That, you know, we identify we've got different signage that has resulted in a blight. And particularly wanting to make sure that we're being mindful of those gateways and kind of that coordinated effort. Coordination with city signage standards, so as you know, the city has taken, there's an area that they don't consider formula businesses, but also not just maybe looking at, not suggesting that staying in signage, but wanting to look at what their signage standards are and seeing if, it's always nice wherever we can overlap on our codes. We looked at several model codes that sometimes there's like an algebra approach suggested in the code of trying to decide what your square footage, height, or area of the sign is. And we have looked at several codes and think that charts and graphics provide a little bit better clarification. So I'm gonna stop with those, and we'd love to, just 1 through 4, make sure that kind of what we're talking about, resonates. And then if you have any specific thoughts around any of those 1 through 4, we'd love to hear what your thoughts are. If there's something kind of in those general modifications that we haven't hit on, we do have some more specific design criteria coming up, but just in 1 through 4, are we hitting the mark with what the concerns are? And do you have a little more guidance on those?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are great. I think obviously it's funny, a sign cone can get really complex really quick. And you know, I think there's the main signage that you're talking about on a building that's like, this is the business. And then there's directional signs, and then there's the auxiliary signs, and then there's like the big giant not dark sky compliant sign on the side of Saturdays that's really annoying. You know, like so there's things like that I feel like it's like, how do we make sure we're taking care of all of those pieces? And then the biggest question that always comes out of all of our regulation is, how are we gonna enforce it? Because we do a lot of, like, there's just, at the end of the day, there's only so much staff and so much ability to comply, and then when one business is doing it and has gotten away with it, it's real easy for another business to start doing it and getting away with it. So I think all of those things, just kind of thinking through, how can we not only create a regulation that we're happy with, but that's easier to maintain, is kind of, we have to keep that piece in our head as well, I think. Because I agree, like, those 2 signs right next to each other between the Roadway Inn and the Saddle Rock Restaurant have been
Horrible, yeah.
horrible for years now, and it's just like, if we did have a way to say, it's gotta go, that'd be sweet. The dark sky thing, I think, is the biggest thing I would like to, I mean, that, actually, it's not the biggest, but it is a big one. I think especially, like you noted, it comes to fruition in some formula businesses, but it's just like, in general, trying to keep those big lighted signs from being lit themselves versus lit with lights. I don't know, you know, and I don't know how you manage all of that, but.
Well, and that one, just the city sign standards, the city's also working on dark sky compliance, and is in the middle of a study right now as well, so nice to see those things line up hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a universal dark sky compliance that everybody is aware of? Or are there different definitions out there
That's a good question.
by manufacturers of equipment versus standards?
I think technically each municipality can have its own standards on what dark sky means, but there should be a
Right, but
general
I think
idea,
A
right? Yeah.
manufacturer that puts on some type of fixture that says, oh, well, we're dark sky compliant.
There is a
By
national
whose-
standard, but
Okay.
as you saw with the National Signage Company, not everybody is willing or able to produce signage that complies.
Okay.
Yeah, so, you know, you can buy lighting fixtures that say dark sky compliant, which is usually downcast and shielded. And then, there are standards, if you go to, the organization, you can get some generalized standards, but again, you know, finding the manufacturer that produces a product that they can put a stamp on it that says that it is dark sky compliant. But, I would say is getting to be more and more recognized. It seemed like we had a manufacturer from California, it was like no problem. We had a manufacturer, I think from Michigan, and it wasn't, you know, so it just kind of depends on where you find the manufacturer too. And so it's, when you have a formula business and they have a set contract with one producer of the signs, sometimes that can get to be problematic for them, but again, we can make our regulations, you know, whatever we want to make the regulations, so.
Well, and I guess my concern for compliance would be that, well, something that's dark sky compliant on the Front Range in downtown Denver where there's not snow on the ground, it's not gonna reflect off the ground. Where there's snow, maybe 8 months out of the year on the ground here, and you're pushing light on the ground and it's just reflecting back up, is it really compliant at that point? Like, is there like a lumens throw that they're looking at, or are they just saying it's gotta be shielded and pointing downwards? Okay, well, that doesn't really make any sense for somewhere where they got snow on the ground 8 or months out of the year and it's just reflecting.
That's true, but that would be something where we would be doing our own regulations, if we wanted to consider that.
Yeah, I think us
National
trying to get in the
doesn't
weeds
do
about
that,
like
right.
what, calling
It
it
really
dark
can't.
sky compliant, I think it's our version. So
Okay,
like I think we would say in our sign code, dark sky compliant, here's what we mean by that. And you have to meet these guidelines.
right, like when you said the idea of signs being dimmed after a certain time, that seems more in line with our region and having snow on the ground all the time. Versus, well, it's just gotta be pointed down, but if you have a 1,000-watt floodlight on a patch of snow, it,
Well, and
We might as
those
well
are
do
two
it.
separate considerations, dark sky compliance first and foremost seems like a no-brainer. And then secondarily, we can have
okay,
options that take into consideration the refractive light too.
okay.
And we've done enforcement, successful enforcement on several different commercial, we did it on Roadway Inn, we did it on, where as soon as it's scattering and polluting out into the roadway, like Roadway Inn had lighting that was doing that, we went through an enforcement, and we were able to get them compliant. We did, the convenience store across from Taco Bell, they also had lights that were just blinding if you went to the store at like 6 in the morning or something. So we were able to get that, we were able to get a long time ago O'Reilly's compliant. And so as soon as we identify them, we're really on dark sky compliant and getting businesses, when they're excessive and getting into vehicular, and they're just blinding. We've had good success with enforcement and getting those remedied too.
And does dark sky compliance, is that also for temporary signage or permanent signage?
Well, we would want it for both. We're not gonna issue a temporary permit for signage that has excessive lighting. And would kind of not understand maybe even why a temporary sign would be, yes, it would be straight across the board, it wouldn't matter.
Because it's the season of elected official signage on the side of the road that when I drive down and they're all facing and reflecting my headlights right back at me, cause they're so bright and shiny. And it's a pet peeve of mine,
Okay.
but
Those
it's,
aren't,
It
you
wouldn't,
can't enforce on like
On
road
political
signs,
signs, there's certain things
Oh,
that
whoa.
you,
why not?
cause they're temporary, or
And-
that's in theory, I think.
and they're not
They're
lit,
special.
they're not,
Mm.
the fact
dark
that-
sky compliant won't count in that way.
And dark
Just
sky
make a
compliance
matte
is only
sign instead
about
of a glossy
artificial
sign
light.
would help.
What about, so you're talking about the Southern Gateway, and you're right, and there are lots of signs for businesses that are no longer in operation. How does the county, how do you affect change with something like the sign that used to be the restaurant on the roadway that isn't there, or down at the turnoff to 24, that lodge that's no longer there?
I think
How
that
would
we
that
can,
work?
I think, so our code would move forward in time. However, I do think that, now that CPD does have enforcement, I don't think that there's, we can reach out and ask for cooperation. And a lot of those, potential areas, I think, are also looking at trying to sell. And that's a great time to get them motivated about making their property more marketable,
Yeah.
so.
Good idea.
I would love, I have seen sign codes where it's like if you put up a sign, a new sign, you can't just replace it with, like, the code does apply,
Right,
right?
oh,
It's
for
not, you're not
replacing.
grandfathered in on,
Exactly.
and if there are people who like don't wanna replace their sign, I think we can consider and discuss some like incentives to say, okay, well, here's what a new sign would cost you. Can we offer you something to like make that happen?
Well, right, like aren't there codes like, you make a rubbish code, that can go back in time, right? Like you can be like, hey, you're not allowed to have a vehicle that doesn't have current registration, like, so
And-
why can't
yeah.
you say you have a sign that you don't need anymore, such as the Saddle Rock, why can't you say you gotta take it
Well,
down.
it's been, yeah, or there maybe hasn't been in use. I also think that what I've learned, like with Family Dollar or Taco Bell, is that there are certain periods of time that those formula businesses need to repair or replace. And so maybe in talking to those managers and like getting them on board to be like, hey, when is that happening? And knowing the time frame, and then saying, we would love it if you complied with this or changed it, what's that process to corporate to like make that happen? Because I mean, looking back at the Taco Bell sign permitting thing, like, they did not have to put that in, right? Like, there's a downcast pedestal sign that's not that much bigger than this chair in Eagle or Edwards at a Taco Bell, and it's like clearly like, okay, well, that must be complying with a local regulation rather than like a formula requirement, right? So like, okay, you didn't need an internally lit sign, like we can do a pedestal with downcast lighting. I don't know that I'm interested in like getting to the lumens reflecting off the snow and all that. I think that's kind of just what it is.
Well, but if you look at it over thousands of signs, right, it could make a difference. I mean, are we talking about standards, or are we talking about doing what feels right?
But what are you suggesting, that there's no lights on signs?
No, I'm not saying that, I'm just saying, what do people need to comply with? Because I think it's important, because if eventually you build out 24 so far with businesses and all kinds of signs, and you start to multiply all of that lumens and throw or whatever over time, it's gonna make a difference. And
But there is
so,
like a safety issue to all of that stuff too, to talk about like
sure,
illuminating things, and I feel like the dark sky pieces of, you know, I don't know if it's changed, but Big R has their lights on. seems like
24/7.
forever,
Yeah.
right? So like, great, let's put in, we have to shut them off at 9
Right.
o'clock or whatever, as long as they're not a security issue for your parking lot or storage facility or
Right. And that's where
inventory or
Ann said the, dimming them, if there's a lumens that, hey, you can reduce the amount of light. If you
Right.
can't turn them off because of safety reasons or
Right.
whatever,
Right,
is there some other kind of standard that you could have for businesses? Also saving energy, I don't know, all kinds of
Yeah, yeah.
different,
yeah,
Now Sarah brought up an interesting point, with existing businesses and replacing their signage. Is there anything that would trigger it going back for a signage review if they're replacing their signs?
Yes, so you cannot replace a sign without a new sign permit. So when a formula business is on their rotation of putting in new signage, they have to come into us and get permits for this.
Okay.
So all the regulations that we're talking about are sign code, the sign permits are administrative, but all of the standards and everything that we're creating have to be reviewed by staff in order to be approved. So when the blighted sign or a new business owner comes in and they wanna use an old sign that's there, they have to come in. It's not assumed that it's grandfathered in and they can use the sign. It's at this point forward. So for instance, on Taco Bell, we are making them remove the pole sign that's in front of the business. And they are, Domino's, what did I say?
Taco Bell.
Oh, Taco Bell, I'm so sorry, that's right. So on Pizza Hut, now becoming Taco Bell, or Domino's. Pizza Hut, now becoming Domino's, one of their conditions of their site plan review, as you know, was to remove the sign that exists in the front of the building, and they're doing all their signage on the building itself. So new use, new site plan, time for us to look at the new site plan and new sign code or sign permit. So that is a great time for us to bring things up to standard. If we wanted to create or potentially add something to maybe our rubbish ordinance where we have junk cars, rubbish, those kind of things, and add in lighted signage or something like that, or a new signage into that, I would suggest, if we wanna kind of go back in time and try to clean up some things that exist that we don't think are gonna be repurposed in the near future and wouldn't trigger a new code permit, a new sign permit, that potentially we would consider maybe, I always hate an idea of a revision of an ordinance, but, because it always is not as simple as it sounds. But maybe adding something, and maybe we could even go through that, rubbish ordinance and just see if there's anything that could be interpreted as, you know, these signs that have been abandoned that nobody is doing anything with on our, you know, our gateways, and add that into enforcement. So we could do, and get back to you on that, we could do a review of the existing 9904 ordinance and just see if there is any way, any authority in that. We can review that with Melissa and Chris and see if we would be within our authority to consider those old abandoned signs where we're not being asked for a new sign permit.
Cause the other piece to that is like the misinformation it provides, you know, as far as people thinking this business exists when it doesn't exist. So creating a regulation that says that's gotta come down when the business is no longer there, I think is not only like a nice sightly thing to do, but also just a good, just in general, informational reason to do that, so just keeping people.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, and I just wanted to bring up one point, Melissa, Cece and I reviewed other draft codes that, to your point, we could go incredibly prescriptive with a sign code, getting all the way down to residential signage, holiday signage,
Yeah.
decorations, real estate signage, we could go, and there are models out there that are incredibly prescriptive. And we came back to, as a collective group, what are we trying to solve? And do we wanna get a code that is incredible for us to administer? And that everything, you know, we're gonna have to be checking, okay, it's been 7 days since that sale, is that real estate sign down? I don't think that we want to be in that position, but there are code examples out there like that. And so we really, after looking at these model codes, it really came back to what are we trying to solve? And let's make sure that we have something that's usable and fix the problems that we've identified now. I think like, and I might point to that too, Jason, with kind of like, if we start to think that our dark skies are being threatened by the amount of new lighting that we have going on, and that and the fixtures where the dark sky compliance can't be isolated to the fixture and how it's mounted and shielded, and that we have to think about scatter and further illumination. I think we tackle that when it becomes a problem, but maybe we wait until that happens. And we kind of, so we looked at those very prescriptive codes, and then we went like this, like, okay, let's come back to what we're trying to solve. And let's not get, you know, overly, go down the rabbit hole too far and make it hard for the public to follow and for us to try to administer.
Well, and even having some basic things like suggestions in that sign code of like, consider turning your lighted signs off when the business is closed unless it's necessary for safety, you know, like, if we're encouraging people to shut all that stuff down when their business isn't, if they don't need the illumination, especially if they're not open in the evenings and what have you. You know, I sometimes find some of those, like lighted menu board signs, and I call them menu boards, but I'm talking about like the ones you were speaking of with, like where the dentist office is and public health is, and, you know, like those, like, why does that need to be lighted at night, you know? And so some of those, I'm like, none of those businesses, not a single one is open at night, who cares if that sign's lit, you know, you can see it during the day. So, other than maybe they would want a light on it for when we go dark at 4 o'clock in the evening soon. But, you know, other than that, like, right, why do you have to have that light on?
Well, and you have to remember too, that all of those signs are advertising for those small businesses as well, so that's a consideration as well. Now, does it need to be on after midnight?
Right.
No, but should it be on while there's traffic on the highway until 10 PM? Probably, only to preserve the businesses, so maybe there's a middle road there.
Well, and like I said, I think you could even get away with this suggesting that
Well, and
up
even,
front, but I think, I mean, to me, 10 o'clock still isn't advertising hours, but I understand what you're saying, yeah.
well, and then just thinking of things like Big R, maybe you can have them turn their advertising signage off and leave the parking lot lights on so that somebody doesn't run into a light pole or into their gated areas. So maybe there's a way to,
Well, and some of them may look at that and be like,
Mitigate
actually, that'll be good, everybody knows we're closed, so if somebody sees somebody driving down there, that's
Yeah.
suspicious, or whatever it is, right? So I think it helps a little bit too, but, yeah, I mean, I think starting out with those kinds of things for dark sky, rather than getting into trying to regulate it up front, deciding what the hours are, all of those pieces, I think suggesting some of those in dark sky compliance language is like, yes, we should have some of them be, some pieces be regulatory, but then some can just be suggestive of like, this is where we're headed and this is what we're hoping, businesses do.
Yeah, and not to harp on the lumens part of this, but there are, like when you said that a replacement would trigger a permit, right? Does a repair trigger a permit? And if somebody was using 100-watt incandescent bulb for something and then they switched to a 500-watt LED during a repair, it would potentially be much brighter and much more annoying.
that's what I
And then you would never trigger a permit, but you would potentially be out of compliance because that lumen. And, we're talking about signage. There, like you said, the parking lot lights for Big R. There's also the rental center that has those giant lights that are pointed downwards, but they are super bright for, I'm guessing, security kind of issues, but those are on all night long as well.
Yeah, and those will be argued as security as well, so we have to come up with a way to,
When you said safety, I think
security,
that's
no
a-
problem, but you're right. it has to
But I
be
think
lumens.
that's then getting into the conversation about dark sky compliance and not sign. I think we
Right.
gotta stay super focused
So that's
here.
what I'm saying, is your dark sky compliance based on signage? Is it based on security and
Well, for
safety?
tonight, it's
Right.
talking about the sign code piece of dark sky.
Right, so but does that dark sky compliance transcend those different areas that it would need to?
I think some people
Or are
have
they
signage
different for
for
different-
security, and some people maybe should have it turned off for security, I don't know,
Right,
so
so
But I
what I'm
think
saying
The
though is,
hospital
is,
needs it on all night,
right, but
but the school doesn't necessarily need it on.
does the dark sky definition, is it changed based on if it's for signage versus security versus safety issues?
Well, I don't know that we're defining it.
I understand, that. I'm just saying, is that taken into account depending on which realm you're using dark sky compliance, the definition? Or does that definition change if you're talking about signage versus security lighting and things of that nature? Just saying to,
It might change a little bit, but tonight, I would like to keep, stay on signs, because when we talk about security lighting and things like that, that's a site plan review. And so when we're looking at lighting for a site, that's gonna be an element that we're gonna look at when we look at site plan, and our site plan standards do call out dark sky, so but it'll be more of a discussion on a case-by-case basis when we're looking at a site plan for anything that has exterior lighting. And so right now, dark sky compliant specific to signage, if we just
Okay.
separate them just a little bit.
yeah, maybe I'm not explaining myself quite, I just feel like that if you're using a universal definition, it may not apply the same to a different realm. In
Oh,
this
sure,
realm
I-
of signage versus the realm of security lights or parking lights or whatever.
Sure,
That's
I could see that, depending on a case-by-case basis, you might allow something a little bit different for security purposes than you might for signage.
Yeah, that's all.
So, yeah, I can see that. Get that, makes, sense. The charts and graphics, so we as staff think that charts and graphics, for the person that may not always be dealing in, signage, or, well, maybe they are dealing in signage quite often, but, we just thinking having charts and graphics are easy than saying, using pi or using an algebraic, definition of what those are, so we've seen both. And I just wanted to make sure that everybody
Having a graphic representation makes all the sense in the world.
Okay.
Agreed.
And including that in the permit and the application, all of that,
Okay,
having it on the website, that makes perfect sense.
okay,
It would make life so much easier.
absolutely, absolutely.
Well, and if in the maintenance standards section, we can just be reminded that when you replace your sign, you have to get a new permit.
Okay,
So
Cause I could see a lot of people not really knowing that they have to do that, to replace the sign, I mean, I could see some big sign, maybe they know, but I think the maintenance standards is good. Coordination, do this, don't do that.
and Melissa, do you have any other thoughts and items run through floor that maybe that we missed?
Somebody, you had something, Sarah.
Oh, did you have some?
I was just gonna say, I feel like the problem, we didn't really talk about the problem is like height, light, right, and even in gateways or for new signs, I remember some arguments in the last couple of permitting processes that was like, nobody needs to see your sign, everybody goes on Google to figure out where to get whatever, you know, and I think I've been paying close attention to that, I think, not necessarily the Google thing is like true, but I think it's less and less you need like huge things, right? And so
Absolutely.
I think the height, I would like to see reduced, I mean, like the Safeway sign, the little guy, the old guy, that's okay. But also, like, do we go to like just pedestal signs? And if that's a standard, then we know that there isn't gonna be vision, litter in your visual.
And that's a
Well,
pretty drastic municipal code change when you go to just your monument signs. And specifically, they can't be backlit, they have to be dark sky compliant. There are several municipalities around, and you've mentioned a couple that do that. That's a big change that requires a big investment of a lot of businesses. Be cool to see Leadville go that direction, but that's a big ask.
Well, and to the thing of the graphics and stuff, I mean, I think I was at the city when we tackled the first iteration of the sign code, right? And I remember, thank you for providing those pictures, I remember people being like, oh, those wall signs, like, what does that mean? Why do we not wanna touch that? And like, I drove up and down Harrison and took pictures of like Dependable Auto and all these, and you're like, actually, weren't we talking about 6 freestanding signs or something, rather than everybody's already got, and everyone's like, okay, maybe that's not so bad. So I think it would be helpful to take that inventory, like continue with that inventory, to make sure that we are not, like, we have a handle on what the problem is and then what
I mean, the city,
enforce that.
we wanna follow the city's guidelines, but we have, as the county, we have much more opportunity for the big franchise businesses to come in with great big signage plans than you do in the downtown corridor. So you're dealing with much bigger potential problems than
And when you
somebody
say
in the city.
pedestal signage, you're talking on the ground,
Yeah, these
Signs.
ground
Monument, I guess the
monuments,
monument sign, right?
sometimes they can only be 5 feet tall, so they're really not much taller than your,
cause you get a
And your
16-foot
shrubbery.
pile of snow, that sign doesn't help anymore, right?
right, well, and to her point is, a lot of municipalities think you don't really need signs, we don't want signs, people will find it by Googling you anyway. So they'll just,
Or
you know,
normal signage.
you
And you're
go to a
keeping their
McDonald's and it
sign
has a very nice
clear.
little McDonald's sign, it's only a 5-foot pedestal in front of the store and that's it.
Mhm.
There's some very tasteful signage on the building itself, but if you're driving down the street, you could be driving down a very busy commercial corridor and not see any signage, it's a wonderful thing, but it's a very expensive thing to,
Where is this?
I've seen it all over the country. It typically is in nicer
Yeah, I've
cities,
seen it.
nicer, smaller
I'm thinking of a
cities.
specific one, but
Boulder does it,
Yeah. Yeah,
is
so
the
I
only
think
one
our
that
thought
immediately
was,
comes to mind, but you'll see it all over the place and
Sure.
you'll notice it when you go in and they tend to be newer towns, not older towns, but affluent towns. And they've literally gone in and banned signage over and above very set specific ones.
yeah,
Yeah, in the tall, you know, and I think that there's something to be said about that in different ways, cause like even one thought I had when you brought up the Sugarloaf and church sign wasn't just that they need maintained, but that just like the clutter of signs
They're offside, yeah.
is, well, the offsite thing should have its own rule, I think there should be extra special rules, so
Is
as
that a
far as
CDOT
whether or not
already?
you can even put an offsite sign up.
If it's in the CDOT right of way, it is. If it's not, or if it's illuminated and it has a reflected nature onto the highway, both of those. So if it's in the right of way and it, or if it has the potential for lighting that could be distracting to anyone on the highway. Cause we refer all of those.
But they would still have to meet our side code, right? Like if we
Right,
said
yes.
no off-site signs, technically those even
Like
doesn't matter.
CMC had to change theirs, cause they put in that scrolling whatever, and that was a CDOT violation, I think, and maybe the city was like, ooh. And then Saturdays, I feel like they were supposed to go back, cause you can't have the LED signs on the highway, but one of the coffee shops downtown does, and Saturdays does, and we thought that CDOT was gonna take care of that, maybe.
No, CDOT, Allen Club approved the Saturday sign and they got a variance
Oh,
from the
wow.
Board of Adjustment.
It is.
It's so terrible.
Have you ever seen?
I'm like,
so-
we are not in Las Vegas. I don't know who approved that sign, but
We love Vegas, we do.
I love going to Vegas, but we are not in Vegas.
I subscribe to Vegas when I go to Vegas.
I said I wanna go to Vegas, that's when I wanna see all that. But the clutter of signs and the clutter of signs that are taller makes it harder to see what's going on. Like, I think that's the other piece, like, right, the majority of signs are meant to be seen while you're driving. And when you see this big sign and then behind it's another sign and you're like, you know, and in between there are road signs and like, it's all too many signs at this height to me. And I just think it's kind of a terrible mix of like, if you drive down the road and you look at like speed limit height down the road and you see how many places have signs that are that height and not like the shorter version, they're either that height or a little bit taller, it's like just nutballs, like how many times you see all these different, like it's too much to me, and like you're not doing your business any favors that way, like, and especially if it's like the long signs, then it's like trying to look around that one, ew, is there a business in there that I'm looking for, it's not
So
on that sign, I don't know,
The
it's all
term
just
for that
silly.
is sign pollution, and it's an actual
Yeah,
real thing. Maybe sign pollution is something that we can take into consideration when a new business wants their new signage and they're in an area that has several other businesses, maybe
well, and it can help when approving those multi-business signs too, like where their placement is. But I just feel like there's a lot going on if you look at that level, and I can see why a lot of places have said, keep your signs down. It does look nicer when you're driving down the road, you can actually see the buildings,
well, and it's
When
not
you're
just
driving down the
size,
road.
it's you can
Mhm.
only have one.
right?
It has to be a certain size, it has to be canted the same direction, so as you're driving down the street, they're all very similar. You can have your logo, but the sign itself, they're all the same.
Oh, yeah,
Because the businesses that'll be going into where the rail yard is, those will they eventually get a group sign? Cause there'll be multiple
you'll have
suites
to
in
ask
there,
them,
right? I
I'm
mean,
sure they haven't decided that
Gosh,
yet.
I hope it would look like our Main Street and not.
well, you know what I mean, so like you were talking about that group multiple businesses on one sign, so it all looks the same, but there'll be a
Well,
couple of those
Those stacking
potentially.
monument signs are actually, that is one solution to the sign pollution. So, yes, hopefully, but those plots in front of rail yard potentially are all owned by individual owners. Not one master planner, so
Well, and I
that'd
think
be an
that's.
interesting ask too.
That's another question is how many signs, because like, to that point, if those businesses are mostly fronting the road, then they have their outside sign. Do they need another street sign? No, you know, not in my
That's a
opinion
good
anyway.
point.
And so it's like understanding when there needs to be, like, how many signs does each person get?
Well, and there is a limit in the sign code as to how many signs you can have as a business.
There currently is,
And
that's
there's
right.
also limit to square footage on those signs and, yeah.
So we're looking at designing a table. So you can immediately look at what kind of sign, what's the maximum area of the sign, how many identifying signs can you have? And so we're kind of looking at a format of a table so that you can see all of that information very quickly and easily. Our existing code sends you all over the place. So if you're in this zone district or this zone district, then this applies, but now you have to jump over here because if you have within your certain distance of a highway or a collector road or an arterial road, then you get an additional maybe this, and then you get this. And so our existing code really has you jumping all over the place. And so what we've been thinking about is putting that in a more user-friendly table where you can just quickly see that, okay, I'm in this zone district, I'm allowed this, and make it very easy. There is one other option in a model out there that if we got a PUD, a planned unit development, or we got a business that wanted to have multiple signage, we can do it one of two ways. We can have it very outlined in the code so that it can be an administrative approval, or some codes take a sign plan to the planning commission for approval. So it just depends on, so think on that just a little bit. It'd be building in another process. So we'd have noticing and we'd have public hearing and we'd have all of those items. Or I think we were kind of leaning towards, well, we really haven't had, maybe other than Taco Bell did have, you know, I can't remember how many total signs we have eventually permitted on their site, but something like that would have to go to the planning commission instead of being administrative. We've been leaning towards still keeping it administrative because we're not seeing a bunch of those, right? We've had one.
Yeah.
So we've been, you know, we think, well, maybe if we have really good guidance in a table that's very user friendly, how many you get and regard, you know, and if there are any qualifiers or specific standards, we have it very accessible and we still keep it administrative. But we do see in areas and codes where they have a lot, like Summit County's code, it is a whole bunch of crazy. I mean, it's good, it's a good code, but it takes a lot of work to administer it. But they have how much more signage than we do, right?
Right.
So by just scale of what our needs are, we were thinking of trying to keep it administrative and keep it in a really user-friendly table like that.
And does this apply to billboards?
Billboards are regulated by the individuals that own the billboards, and so this doesn't regulate billboards. Those are overseen by the companies that own those.
So
And
if somebody
we don't
owned a
control
strip of
those.
land and they wanted to throw a billboard up there, none of this
Those
applies to
are
them?
regulated through, they buy those through the
But the billboards existing were already approved, but if somebody
You're saying
wanted to put
new-
new billboards up, they'd
Oh,
have to
yes,
get
new.
approval for us.
yes, new,
New, that's what I'm talking
Yeah.
about
but
specifically.
our existing ones, we don't regulate what goes on those. We've had very interesting messaging on them.
We sure
Yes,
have.
Yes, we have.
I'm surprised we don't right now, actually.
It toned it down.
And cause we, and we went through that because we received complaints about the content and we can't, and there's legislation that we have to be mindful of about content, so we can't.
I will say though, at some point trying to, when the content was so, like it was just there and it never changed. For 7 or 8 months I called out front,
Out front, I think it's out front.
and I left messages. And then things started to change.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, great, cause people would be like, how do I get that as a local business? How do I do this? And I never got a phone call back.
But it changed.
But and I don't know if they're correlated, but I was like, okay.
Thank you for doing that
Keep
anyway.
calling.
Being the greasy wheel, or the
Yeah,
Squeaky wheel.
exactly.
squeaky wheel, not the greasy wheel. Oh my goodness,
The
the
kids
kids
are
are tough tonight.
It does sound like there's a certain, I don't, from you all, a certain, maybe support for a gateway signage, you're talking about having some uniformity and some height and maybe some material similarities. And that's kind of what we wanted to talk about in terms of the gateway, how would we define that, our ways in and ways out of the community, where we really want it to look more uniform perhaps? And I hear a little bit of both, but there's some positive ideas about that.
Do we already know specifically what the gateway areas are? Are they just coming 24 north and south? Are they going across Wethy and?
Well, that's a bit of what we wanted to talk about. If we were to define that, if that's an
Okay.
idea you wanna run with a little bit, how would we define that? And we were talking about kind of, I'm sure 91 and 24 down to maybe the stoplight, something like that. And in that area, which we've been talking about already.
Mhm.
And we would wanna be coordinated with the city so that it wasn't obvious, oh, just left the county, going into the city. We wouldn't want that outcome, but control it some.
No, coming to the stoplight and then from south, the retail corridor starts pretty much right there Saturdays, doesn't it? And going all the way up to the corner where
On the
it turns
parking.
to Harrison.
Well, but staying in the county, but thinking about
Well,
what's
sure.
consistent in the city. So as far as our jurisdiction, though, we're gonna end right at CMC, so.
I guess I am trying to figure out if it would be, I'm just trying to think of those two corridors and trying to decide if I feel like the regulation would be different.
And I think that's what we were thinking, like, do you want maybe some design criteria in those areas? You know, our design criteria for site plan is that we try to get things to be that mountain architecture look as far as structures.
Hmm.
Do you want to have signage that has natural materials to it? Do you want it to look a
Yeah, I just want that to be everywhere.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good point. It's a good-
Or
I mean, I guess that's what I'm thinking is like our sign code, I mean, those are the main commercial corridors anyway, as far as things that would need signs. And anywhere that would be outlying would be in areas where I would still want that regulation, I guess. So I just am thinking that whatever we came up with sign code would be
maybe you're right.
Universal.
universal.
Maybe.
I can't think of something different that I would want on a corridor that I wouldn't also want somewhere else.
Well, there really isn't an argument, many communities, it's like maybe they're highways, or something where people are traveling at high speeds and you need to be able to see it because you're getting off the interstate.
Yeah, then a really big tall sign's better
But
than
there's
shorter.
never that case here, there's never that.
No, you're
argument.
35 miles an hour or less, almost from Saturdays.
What? It's only 35.
No, well, not at Saturdays, it's not, but
No,
right
almost,
beyond it, yeah,
almost,
yeah.
Who knew?
But also keep in mind,
But that
we've got-
indicates that 100-foot tall pylon sign
That's
too.
right, but we
I
also
kind of agree
got,
with that point, it's like I'm trying to think of like where else would you not want that same kind of standard, like the
Yeah.
8 to 24 intersection, there's some signs by those
Mhm.
cabins and stuff, I don't want like a 50-foot something there, like,
right,
yeah.
so 80, that's just what I was gonna say, 82 and 24, and then the village, right? Anything along 82 into the village of Twin Lakes and a little bit beyond that. So, those would be the areas that we really probably have, that's all zoned,
Or
a
that-
combination of business and.
Sorry, that little commercial strip, like where the new storage place and there's that like stone company, are those all in the scenic conservation overlay anyway? Or
They
I don't
are
remember that.
outside of it, at least the, I know
They're just
Lynn
outside of
Schiffers,
it.
they're just
Okay.
outside of it.
But I think they would, neither of those need a tall sign.
Yeah,
Like a
yeah, no,
monument
I'm-
sign would look great. I mean, and if we eventually moved that direction to say everything's gotta have like, I don't necessarily want them to all look the same, I think that's weird and two-story book for me,
That-
but
I was gonna
as
say,
far as
that
them all
makes
being
sense.
like monument-ish or something, like if we moved that direction someday, that'd be beautiful. Like it'd be really nice if O'Reilly sign was just this little thing, but until then, I think
Yeah.
maybe not allowing a whole lot more of those and creating a height I guess I can't see anywhere else where we wouldn't want the same code, or where it would need to be looser.
What's the maximum signage height currently?
Right now, 35 feet.
35 feet, just like a building.
There are a couple places in the code we reduce it to 15. But not, you know, so there are a couple places that, and I'm gonna be wrong if I remember, I read it out of the code too, Melissa. There are a couple places that it reduces it to 15, but pretty much it aligns with our maximum building height of 35. But we do have a couple places. And I think that, you know, I really wanted to gain your opinion on, are we all on the same page that 35 feet for a sign is excessive in Lake County?
Yes?
Yes.
Now, another thing to think about
I
with
would
that
rather
too-
be 15 and then you have to
Right.
have some sort of special criteria to grow above that.
Well,
Well,
and so just on that point, it's like, I would also like to make sure you pay attention to what the criteria are for variances, you know, and that's pretty tight.
Yeah, you
Right.
can't approve a Las Vegas sign on that.
Cause they talk about like me when they went for variance.
Against everything.
It was like, we told you we didn't want this and you just applied for a variance to go bigger, like,
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing how creative businesses get when they have a restrictive sign ordinance. So you'll see smarter, better designed, better properly lit signs if you restrict your signage ordinance.
And
So
and
I-
add on that, on a creativity note, is this ordinance gonna touch on mobile signs? Cause there's these outfits that have these trucks, that have these, you know.
But is that
Speaking of
something we
Vegas.
see in Lake County?
Speaking of Vegas,
In Vegas, that's right.
But is that
And
something we
they're-
see in Lake County?
I have actually seen one go through before, but.
Was it on its way somewhere, like to Las Vegas?
But there are like the box trucks that people do and they park them outside their business and that's their sign,
Sure.
Yeah,
and
there's
that's
that.
not appropriate
And
either.
then and then the other thing, and I don't know, this may be silly, but these, you know, those air operated flip floppy things
Oh,
that you have.
Yeah.
We could just
I
ban
think
those
that-
outright.
I think those are really tacky.
We can prohibit, we can make obvious, we already prohibit certain signage. We can prohibit mobile signs, we can prohibit, vehicles being used as signage if we think that's inappropriate.
Balloons.
And the balloon people,
But I also, you know, and then you get into the conversation about, and I feel the same way, and I guess this is another question I have about temporary signs. I don't even know what our code says for temporary signs right now, but there are some people who just use banners as their permanent sign, like temporary doesn't ever come down, and then also those flags. Like the flags that say open or whatever, and they're just up all the time. I think those are really cheesy, and I think you just need your office, your business sign, and then that's it, and you can have an open sign in your window, but I think those open flags are cheesy, I know some people really think they're very helpful, but,
Once
you know, I
again-
think it's talking about some of those things of clutter and,
Once again, if we prohibit the clutter, it makes people be more careful about their permanent signage. So we could kill two birds with one stone there. And I would be all for limiting total signage height, restricting it relatively drastically.
Does that include the political signage?
Yeah.
On the,
If you wanna put a political sign more than 15 feet high,
no, I'm saying like 20 different signs and what, like, is it
there's
first
nothing you
come,
can do
first
about
served?
that. That's a separate thing entirely, has nothing to do
has
with this
nothing to do with our
conversation.
sign code.
Well, I'm all for doing something
But
about it.
November 8th,
November
feel free.
5th is gonna fix that.
yeah.
No, it
It's
never
just-
does.
For the
November
sixth.
5th does nothing. They just stay out there longer.
But it would be interesting to look at.
We'll
if
see.
any of the
I'll
signs
hold
have-
you to that.
But then what do you do? Because, I mean, just as an example, Big R's building is probably 24 or 30 feet tall.
No, I think there should be exceptions, like, but you have to apply for it.
That's great.
You know, like you have the
Make people
norm
actually think
becomes,
through it.
yeah, you have the norm where it's 15, and then there can be certain exceptions that can be granted.
What's
And
the,
maybe that's based on square footage, maybe it's based on the speed limit, on the on the access road, maybe
Yeah.
that's,
The topography.
And if you
The
feel like you have some
topography.
kind of random special circumstance, great, then you
Well,
have to
and
get
that's where you
approval.
go to a variance, and yeah, people can't see me because I'm over a rise. Sure, but that could be done on an individual basis.
What's the tallest building?
One of the important thoughts
Is it Tabor or is it your?
about height of signage is the scale of a human being, right? So the lower it is, the more kind of pedestrian friendly they are, you know, so if you're trying to facilitate a more walkable environment, which we aren't always in every place, but in those places where we are, I think those lower signs really facilitate that, and a 15-foot sign is not that, it's big, it's way over your head. And so I think that might be something, and we could take some pictures and think about sort of what that means and where for our next discussion, but I think, 15 is tall in that kind of environment.
anything that you wanna walk.
And it seems like everybody is on we prefer you to be more restrictive rather than less restrictive. From signage materials to signage height to lighting, all of those things, everyone in the room seems to be, and please speak up if I read that wrong, but everybody seems to be on the side of more restrictive.
Yeah, I mean, I would prefer that signs themselves can't be lit, like them internally lit, you know, they're lit another way. But the other variance to the height, the only thing I was thinking about is like, for instance, if rail yards, well, they're gonna be in the city, but let's use them as an example. If those businesses put signs up, like, I don't know, for instance, if my sign is higher than 15 foot, because that's where the first level of rise is, right? So like, maybe there's exceptions if it's on the building, it can be higher, like Leadville Dental Center is higher than, but it's on the building.
Where Safeway has a big Safeway sign, but it's like kind of,
It's a
it's
bit-
not obnoxious, it's like.
And it's on the building,
Yeah.
so I think almost if it's on the building, that's an exception also to the height
Right,
variance.
we're talking about signage, generally that's
Freestanding.
Yeah.
Well, and when you get on the Harrison corridor, my sign, just like your sign, they come down naturally because if they're up too high, nobody sees them anyway. And you are talking about a walking or a very slow moving traffic clientele. And so all of your signage just naturally regulates itself lower.
Right.
So
People can figure it out.
the city is working on a buffer zone outside of the historic district that will affect signage as well, so something to talk to Chapin about. And that would include the rail yard area, but it also includes from CMC up to the corner. And the HBC is trying to turn that into a buffer zone so that so that somebody doesn't do something incredibly crazy right next to the National Historic District. So that might be an easy way to work in with the city. And help to regulate things like the future rail yard commercial corridor, cause that will be part of that buffer zone. Potentially.
I think that point about like how it deals with the pedestrians is a really important one, especially in some areas.
I wanna plant a seed, I'm not saying this is inevitable, because I think we need to go back and look at our capacity, because I do think, I'm already seeing, a little bit deeper, scope of work. And so I just wanna plant a seed right now, there could be, we have nobody, we have one. No, we don't, we don't have a sign pending with Domino's, do we?
No,
Just
like
Lake
for wants to replace their sign.
Okay. That's the only person that we have waiting. All I was going to say is our moratorium expires on November 19th. And I'm starting to wonder if our depth of work might take us a little beyond that. And so I want to just kind of give everybody fair warning that we might be asking for an extension of that to give us a little more time to get this fine-tuned the way that we want it to, cause I'd really like to be able to take this feedback and come back to you with a model code, or a draft code of what we're thinking before we actually set the public hearing date for it. Right now, we've got it set for the 17th and taking it to the board on the 18th. either that, or at least if we could maybe take this feedback this evening and see if we can, how quickly we could have it ready for the first meeting in November, which is the 12th, right? If
That's
we
when
can
we-
have this ready by November 12th.
It's not very long away, that's not much
Not
time.
very long, and we do have something else on that agenda. So anyway, I wanna plant that seed that we might be asking for a little more time on this, so Board of County Commissioners. We might be asking for a little more time to extend the moratorium so that we make sure that we get it the way that you want it, because I'd love to have at least one more check-in after we've taken this feedback and we bring something and see what you think about it. And I'd also I'd like to have some time to meet with the city, with Chapin and Alex, and see kind of what you're telling us, because I was unaware of that scope of work.
It's just something we're discussing right now, but it has been in discussion for a couple of months now,
Okay,
trying to create just a transition zone for those two areas that butt right up against the National Historic District. So from CMC up to the turn on Harrison, and then from the stoplight in.
okay. Which is kind of good to get some ideas of what they're doing and you know, it'd be nice if we're very congruent with one another. And then I thought the feedback that you gave us, that maybe it's not just the gateways, when you start thinking about signage and realistically where we're gonna get asks, it is countywide. It's not just the gateways where we wanna be a little more and overall, we could be more restrictive, we could give better guidance on height, design criteria, lighting, and trying to get away from the like off-site signage, clutter and sign pollution and things like that. So I think those are some good takeaways. That I think that I think we're on the right track of we're getting a little more restrictive, but we're not gonna go to a full-blown kind of like Summit County code where they've gotten very prescriptive about any signage whatsoever, whether that's residential or non-residential.
Well, we just don't even have the capacity to do something.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can have all the codes in the world, if you can't enforce them, it doesn't really matter.
Amen, and and you don't get good compliance because they're too difficult to comply with. So,
Yeah, well, thank you guys for
Yeah. Any questions for us or anything, Melissa or Cece, that you haven't answered? I like also solar lighting, if we posted, like solar lighting might be a good option for maybe the way that it, naturally, organically would dim and stuff, some thoughts. I don't know how effective it would be, but awesome. Great, thank you for all of that feedback, and I do think that we'll probably be asking for a little more time. So, we'll get that ask on an agenda.
Okay. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
It's your turn.
I mean, we don't have to, we can
Edwards moves to
talk
adjourn.
What
about
else do
political
we
science.
have?
He moved to adjourn. Howard, second
I seconded.
it. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Bye, Howard.
Bye-bye.
Jason, to your point, we have little tiny